My name is Sarah Jewel Morton. Farm is Cattle Run Farm LLC in Ruckersville, Virginia. So we are a third generation cattle farmer in Ruckersville, Virginia. We sit at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains. My parents purchased that farm in the early 1970s, and it has been in the family ever since. It was really more of a family farm. My dad was more of a hobbyist. He liked it. Both of my grandparents, maternal and paternal grandparents, were farmers in Greene and Albemarle County. And of course, my dad ended up getting his own farm and farming because he had a love and a passion for it. And I call it more of a hobby farm until later on I went off to school, majored in animal science and ag education, got a degree in career technical education, and then working towards my PhD in agricultural community education leadership. So, I came back when my dad started ailing and my brother was retiring out of the military. And, my father said, I'm done. It's y'all's. You do what you want with it. And so that's when I started thinking about how do we make this a sustainable farm for the family. So we knew we had to reestablish infrastructure on the farm because what my father had and what we were leaning towards, we knew we could not use what he currently had. So we thought about, what are the key rudiments here on this farm that we have that we can continue to think differently about. One was land, two was cattle, right? Three was the homestead. So there was three variables there that we already had that we didn't have to go out and purchase. And we had equipment. And so we started looking at what can we do with the beef? Well, we had livestock now, so let's create a value added and do the grass-fed beef program. So that's when we got into that market. Then we had the homestead, and I said, let's look at creating an Airbnb. So we did a huge major gut and renovation on the homestead. And then the land, we were able to get in with the NRCS and the cost share programs for fencing, cross fencing, and then of course we paid for perimeter fencing as well, so we could reestablish good infrastructure there on the farm. Mm-hmm. So those are three key things. Scaling is critical, and in order to sustain farming, you've got to have different niches and you have to diversify. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we did. So we started out with the cattle, we started out with the land, we had the homestead. So we went from having livestock now to grass-fed beef. My brother, he retired out of the military. So as part of his, and he's a disabled veteran. So part of his horticultural therapy and agricultural therapy was getting him connected to the small farm outreach program at Virginia State University, mm-hmm. where he learned berry production and he fell in love with blackberries. So we now have thornless blackberries on the farm. We implemented raised beds so that we could do vegetables on the farm and sell at the farmer's market. And then, of course, I've done some piloting with blueberries and grapes. And so that'll be the next venture. And we also was approved for a high tunnel so that we could extend our grow season with berries. And then, of course, my brother he's now into goats and he's now into pork where he does free range pork. And of course, chickens, and of course, we have free range eggs. So that's kind of how we have diversified the farm. And the nice thing about it is that farm now takes care of itself. When you have family property, and specifically when you look at it from a minority perspective, oftentimes you lose property because you have an individual within the family that says, I don't want anything to do with it. I want my share. I want you sell it off. And that's when you start, having conflict. And so one of the things that my dad did was create it so that we didn't have that, right? So it's mm-hmm. the way he set it up into the trust, and it just goes from generation to generation to generation. And so But also we're looking at conservation easements now so that it can never be developed. We're right on the main thoroughfare in Ruckersville where we have 33 that connects you to 81. So we're right on a main thoroughfare. So it would be very attractive for someone to come in and commercialize, which he did not want happen. And I'm not going to let that happen in my lifetime. So that's when we started looking at ways for sustainability, right? And scalability. We took it down, took everything down to a real estate attorney, and we put the property in our names. And so basically my father had lifetime right there, and then at his demise it came over to the children. So we hadn't got all that put in play. But in terms of, of course, in terms of lending, we used our regular local bank, but a lot of it, is out of our pockets, right? So, and we also, several mini grants, we've gotten mini grants from the Food Shed Capital and things like that. The mini grants that MVFP put out, we were recipients of some of those. But in terms of funding the legal work, that was out of our own pocket again. And then, of course, funding some of the projects on the farm out of our own pocket. We would, when we got a tractor for the farm, we went through John Deere. So we used, anywhere there's zero financing or something like that, we use it. But again, that was the only big piece of equipment that we actually purchased was a new tractor. And then, of course, my brother, everybody's buying different things, repair on trucks. We may either pay for, the farm pays for. So any large costly things, we tried to self-fund. I'm always a firm believer, the Bible always says once an adult, twice a child, right? And so understanding that as children, it is our responsibility to take care of our parents. And of course, we lost my mother in 99. So my father, lived till he was 75 and he passed away in 17. But he knew that his two youngest kids were very much because we grew up in 4-H. I have an older brother who's into farming. I have my middle brother, he's a chef. My sister is an interior designer and an entrepreneur. And so, and we all have craft and skills that we can contribute to the farm. And as I spoke earlier, we all have different niches on the farm. So my brother, Ralph, who is my middle brother, my baby brother, he is the farm manager. So he maintains the farm. My sister is an interior designer and entrepreneur. She was the one who designed and decorated the inn, the homestead. And of course, myself, I do a lot of the back end business work of the networking, the outreach, the grant writing, a lot of the business side of the farm, looking at what's the next phase, what's the next venue, what's the next opportunity for us to capitalize off of. And we used that farm when my dad turned it over to us, that I said, this farm has to take care of him. And so that's exactly what we did. We established an account in the farm name, and we contributed a specific amount of money to that account on a monthly basis. And so I said, we need to establish an account that each person has to contribute a specific amount of money, which then goes to pay, whatever because how the farm was paid for. So, electric, phone bill, groceries, whatever. That account is used so that oftentimes when a person passed away, you have to go through all the paperwork of getting notarized, getting this, who's going to be in charge and all this stuff. Well, luckily we had an operational fund that was in the farm name, which was in the kid's name. So it was outside of my dad's own fund. So we were able to operationalize until we got his estate taken care of and converted into the trust. So, it all alleviated who's going to pay this and what are going to do, I don't have any money, it eliminates all of that, because start early. Don't wait until you start seeing the decline. you start early. When that parent says it's yours, take it over, immediately go open up an account with the kids' names on it, or whoever wants to be the, and everybody has to contribute, right? It's just not one individual. They're everybody's parents. So, and thank God we did that, because we were able to have funds to operationalize off of, right? And so as we culled down the herd, we put those funds in there, but those funds was also used to take care of my father, buy medicine, buy groceries, pay for small things, get the truck fixed, whatever we needed to get done. So it does help when you establish those accounts. That way you're not locked financially until you can say, I need access to X account or Y account. You have your own that you're functioning off of. So that really helped. And, and then of course my father identified, he said, I'm not picking one person to oversee this. I'm picking 3 people to oversee this. So, one person can't make decisions. It takes 2 people to make a decision out of the 3, right? And so, because he knew each one of his kids. And so I specifically said I did not want to be in charge because I handled my mother's. But I was one of the 3 that was chosen to be a decision maker on the farm. So my dad, in 2011, I had noticed his decline early on, but I just saw him slowing down. But then in 11, I really started decline. But he had begun to have conversations with me independently about, y'all need to figure out what you want to do. Don't want the land developed. So, I immediately started thinking about how do we make this work? I knew as a child that I wanted to come back and make it a big production farm, and I'm part of a group called Virginia Agricultural Leaders Obtaining Results, which is a leadership fellowship program through Virginia Tech. And so we had an international trip over to Peru. And, I often say less is better, right? When people think about, I got to get into farming, I need to own 5,000 acres, I need to have 500 head of cattle. You got to think about sustainability. You have to think about quality of life. You have to think about, do I have the funds? Am I a self-funded operation? And when you're looking at all of these different entities, what are you going to pass on? What are you going to leave behind? My father did not enter in any of the federal programs. He didn't believe in it. And given the historical precedent of those federal programs, specifically being a minority farmer, it did not work in your advantage to go to the federal side, because there are many farmers who have lost their land to the federal government because of the tricks that were played. And, rightfully so, you can't point all the fingers at the federal side. There's independent responsibility as well, but it doesn't help when you have people that's going against you, right? The support of NRCS, the relationship with Virginia State University, my experience with Cooperative Extension, the relationship we've established with Jacob Gillian American Farmland Trust and the regenerative ag, and I'm on some soil fertility committees and task force, just in the community as a whole, minority and veteran farmers of the Piedmont, Carl Stafford with the beef quality assurance training, just really doing that non-formal training piece, but also being a former meat grader myself, being a person in the ag industry myself, understanding, reading a lot. I pay attention, I read to see what other people are doing. Progressive Farmer, the Lancaster paper. I look at a lot of the Drover's Journal, look at a lot of different things out here to seek guidance. VCAP and looking at what opportunities, DCR. So being able to know the resources myself, but also to be a resource for other people that's interested and may not know, regional food commissions. I'm also part of a hunger coalition to help mitigate the attrition of small farmers, but also to help to ensure that people have access to fresh and healthy food despite your socioeconomic status. really helping to change the narrative on food banks. Food banks are not just for poor people. Food banks are for people who need access to fresh and healthy foods. So we need to, debunk that myth that food banks are for the poor people. They're not. Food banks are, that's not food equity either, right? Food banks are a hub where people are getting stuff that you and I don't want to eat. And so part of the Hunger Coalition and Minority and Veteran Farmers is to help debunk that and to provide protein to food banks so people have access to fresh protein just like you and I do, despite their social economic status. So, so I have I have a huge network in which I'm a part of. I'm also a regional workforce director, so I also tell the story, and I serve a very rural area. So really getting folks to understand, how do we build the next generation of agrarian leaders, farmers, entrepreneurs, whatever that looks like, so that we can sustain the land, because the more we build houses, the less food access you're going to have. Oftentimes the beauty, we're a unique situation because each one of us have our own property. So we weren't dependent on the homestead, right? And so my brother, when he relocated back here, he stayed there for roughly 2 or 3 years. And then he bought a house for him to determine where he really wanted to live. And he found the need. He was like, I need a disconnect. As a farm manager, I don't want to farm 24/7. He was like, I get up in the morning, I go farm, out here till at night. But now he gets up, he goes, he works, and at 5 o'clock, he's back home. So he needed that disconnect. And so that's the beauty of, in most families, not all cases, everybody has their own dwelling, right? They either renting or they own their own property. For us, we own our own property. We have our own houses. So we did not need to use the farm truck. We did not live in the main homestead because, I need a place to live and I want to live there for free. I mean, even myself, I sold one of my houses. I moved into the farmstead for 3 months till my house was ready. My other house was ready. But I actually paid rent because it's a business, right? When you think about your property as a business, it is a business because you have 5 investors. And so my other 2 brothers, they really were hands off, they can come to the farm at any given time, but they know when they do things or they come, they know, like, hey, I need to borrow the truck. Fine, you need to borrow a truck, pick the truck up, bring it back. The expectation is, when you have standards, requirements, and expectations and they're outlined, then it's no problem. You use the truck, you put gas in it, and you bring it back. It's filled when you leave it, you bring it back filled, right? You treat it, it's a business, right? I wrote a check to the farm to state. People's like, why you wrote it? I'm like, yeah, it's a business, right? And so anything that I need, if I want to rent the space out for an event, I rent it out and I pay for it, just like, everybody else. So the understanding is that whole place takes care of itself. So the money that's made goes right back in to the developments, the infrastructure to grow to the next phase, whatever, because we have our own, as they say, God bless the child who has their own. Well, we all have our own. So it's not like we need to depend on the revenue coming off that farm for us to live. We all have full-time jobs. My brother's retired military. So again, we see it going back into the farm. And so when you can show and you're very transparent, I will outline what the projects are going to be, or I keep people informed. So when you do that, there is no misconceptions about, somebody's, it's very clear, it's very evident, right? So people have access to you can look at the accounts to see what's in the accounts, right? So when you're fully transparent, you have nothing to hide. So then there's no room for, who's doing something that they're not supposed to, something that's unethical. Everything's done with integrity and fidelity. But, that's why say that? But he was hands off, right? And so, my father recognized that, and that's why he put the 3, my sister, myself, and my youngest brother in charge. So that's how that worked. And so we basically are 3 that makes the decisions. And if there's something at the end of the year and we want to give a stipend or we want to give a dividend, you can do that, right? You have that autonomy to do that. I know it's hard conversation, but succession planning is important in anything, even if you're on your job and, you always want to leave it better than what you received it, right? And so I would just say, think about establishing that financial platform that you need for the family in terms of, so it doesn't fall on one individual. Find a local bank that you trust and the people know you. These community banks are huge. Community banks I'd rather deal with than to deal with the large scale ones because they know who you are. They know your assets. They know your contributions to the community. So having that community banker and then that legal counsel that can give you advice and support, but also have a support system too that you can lean on that is going to also share resources, is going to be that pipeline of information. Stay out of the gossip tube. As I tell folks, you can't believe everything you hear. Get out there and research it on your own, and participate. Get out here and go to meetings and listen, because you don't know that you don't know. And if you're not getting information, then go to the source that you can be added to the mailing list or distribution list so that you are informed, so that you can make the best or move it from good to great on your own farms, so that people are aware, your siblings. And if they aren't aware, if they're not interested, then find out, do you have a niece or nephew, or do you have, would your son is, think about what it looks like, because if you don't have paperwork drawn up, I encourage people to do so. I also encourage people to put their land in conservation easements. You do get a little compensation off of it. So I would encourage folks to put land in conservation easements because it's going up. I mean, when you travel the state, you just see more bricks and mortar and less green spaces. And, we often think about, why do we need to wear masks? Well, when you don't have green spaces, you're going to be forced to wear masks 24/7, right? Because you've got to have the fresh air, but also just be engaged so that folks understand what you're doing, how they can help you. Tell your story. Sometimes people are afraid to tell the story, but every family is going through some sort of adversity. When it comes to land and money, every family's going to have that fight. They're going to have that one that wants their share. They're going to have that one that wants to cause conflict. And just be prepared to say, look, we want, and have that conversation while your parents are living. Have the conversation so that they are aware, so they can go ahead on. And if that person doesn't want anything to do with it, then they can get their financial share or whatever that parent deems for that individual to have before their demise. It's so critical. That could alleviate so much unnecessary rhetoric in a family if you just have those honest conversations. Just as much as you talk about you don't like such and such in-law, you don't like such and such brother-in-law, have the conversations about what does this look like 10, 15, and 20 years down the road, and prepare, because once you get rid of it, you can't get it back.